Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and Construction Innovation Adventure with the mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Greg Santoro. He earned his BA in economics at Yale University. Then after working in strategy consulting for 2 years, Greg started his career in construction, working in a technology incubator at Stanley Black Decker. He then moved on to co-founding DADO and now serves as head of product over there. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about construction inspired you to make the move into the contact space?
Well, I think there was, so for a little context, I used to work at DeWalt and I was in their tech incubator. And so my first introduction to construction was on job sites working with like hardware solutions, Wi-Fi and IoT solutions on job sites. And I think I just realized there was, which is now heavily reported on, like a lack of digitization. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is really cool. My grandfather was a plumber, so I have like some familiarity with construction from that as well. And I was kind of interested to see what would come of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's been a lot of change and disruption in that area over the last few years.
Yeah, hopefully more to come.
Digital front. Yeah, absolutely. Well, really want to sit on innovation a lot, which is, super far off topic for us that we talk about every single episode. But you have a cool vantage point on it. So want to kind of pick your brain on all things innovation for this episode.
Great.
Let's start with how does the process really look like for you for generating and then really executing on new innovative ideas?
Yes, and I think that's actually, it's a very good distinction because, when you talk about innovation, I think it is both those pieces, the generation and the execution. And for me personally, I think the execution side is really important because you could have a great idea, but you might not execute on it. So to your question, what does the process look like for me? I'll just give like an example from DADO, where I currently work. So I think we approach innovation with like kind of three different tactics. So one is really focusing on the problem. And so we really truly try to understand what the specific pains are and create solutions to address those pains, and then continually iterate because you probably don't solve the pain at first to figure out really, are we solving this issue? And that kind of helps. It's kind of you're generating and executing at the same time. I think the second tool we use is having diverse perspectives. So, and I kind of think about this in two parts. One is you want to make sure you have multiple people involved in the brainstorming process. So not just like product people. And I also think it means that you have to yourself create a big knowledge base. So like I myself can't think of all the ideas, but I think it's really useful to look at other industries to say, well, how are they applying a certain technology? Like take, for example, digital twins. And then if you increase your knowledge base, then you'll have a diverse perspective to bring to the team. Mm-hmm. And then the last tactic I think is really important is storytelling. So I think a lot of people like to write out product specs with like bullet points and here's a problem we're going to solve by doing this. And I think it's hard to get the whole team involved by just having bullet points and providing a story of like, this is what the user customer is experiencing. It helps everyone engage and fully understand and empathize with the problem. And then that enables them to think of solutions. Because a lot of times, we're not one person is going to come up with a solution. Multiple people will, and enabling them to think about the problem just like you are can really facilitate both the generation and execution of ideas.
Yeah, there's so much just packed into that. I was feverishly writing. So let's dive in on the iteration part of it first. So how do you develop then this space to try new things? And mainly coming from a couple different vantage points on that. One, how do you build in the time to sit with a blank sheet to just ideate? And then how do you build in the mentality that it's okay to try new things?
we'll take a recent example. A feature we're working on currently is forms. It's basically digitizing forms for contractors today. So that could be a work order, a daily report, etc. And a number of people are doing this today, but a number of our customers want that type of digitization, but also want it in a searchable format, so that when they have an issue in the future where someone's like, hey, you messed this up, there was a leaky pipe and you didn't tell us about it. They're like, yeah, we did, it's right here. They can find that really quickly in a discussion. And so I think the problem was, okay, I need to digitize these forms and I want to have them in the searchable data. I want to have them searchable like in DADO. And I think we've built into our process, like focusing on like what is the precise workflow. And then we are literally, like I'm on Zoom with engineering and we're literally drawing all the potential solutions of like, what is the workflow for this? So I think for us, to your first question, how do you build the space? It's like literally a part of our process of like, don't like consider what's there today, but also think about the entire flow and how are you going to execute on it. So for us, it's built into the process, creating that generation of new ideas, and everyone is involved in that process of sketching and thinking of ideas. It's actually something when Jake and I, Jake CEO of DADO, did the incubation to come up with the idea for DADO. It was very much founded on design principles where we created, I think, 100+ prototypes. It was just people just brainstorming all the time. So I think it's just kind of part of our process.
Yeah.
And to the second part of your question, I think it has to do with the concept of failure. I think people are afraid to go outside of their swim lanes a lot of times because it's comfortable to be in your swim lane. You know what you're doing, you know how to do it. I think honestly what I try to do is I work with so Ryan, he's CTO at DADO, to try to really create a process where we encourage people to propose ideas. I think a lot of times there's like a structural hierarchy in a company, and people will be afraid to kind of propose propose an idea to someone else because there's like a power dynamic. I think we really try to create a process that is like, we want ideas generated. That's a part of your job. We want you to propose these things. So and we it's okay if it's not 100% right. So I think, like, I'll give you an example. On our side, working with design, a lot of times design really wants like a beautiful design and wants to make sure it's like right from the get-go. I think I like constantly will reiterate every single day, hey, we're really going to focus on functionality. We're really trying to focus on the solution here. And basically we try to encourage every day through all of our interactions, the idea that it's okay to fail. Failure is a part of innovation. Ultimately, you want to get to success. There's going to be failure along the way. And I guess it's just reiterating every single day that this is a part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It ties in, I think, to one of the other aspects that you were mentioning earlier with the different vantage points and getting that different perspective. I loved how you tied it to even on an individual level of making sure that you're well-rounded and getting diverse inputs coming in. So like read different areas, different sources, contradictory sources too. I think that's a practice that very few people actually do and put into place. We tend to just read stuff that we enjoy and that we kind of already agree with to begin with, and reading something that challenges your concept and your thought process, I think, goes a long way.
Yeah, I set up a few channels in our Slack, which is Slack's the messaging system for anyone who doesn't know, where we'll post articles or post product ideas, and then there'll be a 50+ message thread of like thinking about, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? So I think bringing to the table these different concepts from different industries or just ideas you come up with, and facilitating a medium by which you can freely discuss things is what we try to do at DADO. And it comes up with some really good ideas sometimes. It also generates a lot of excitement, which is also really important for I think innovation, where you have to really be motivated to solve this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's cool too that you guys tie that to the storytelling aspect of it and tie innovation into storytelling. And you had a really interesting line that by telling the story, it allows other people to think about the other solutions that you didn't, by kind of bringing in that relatability aspect of it too. That I thought that was a cool perspective of it.
Yeah, I know. Because you're a big fan of storytelling. I know because I listened to you on the CPC.
Yeah, it was my radar went up. I love it. That was great. So bringing in pain points as part of the story element, you got to explain kind of the problem and set up what what's the potential risk that somebody has in this adventure. What are some of the pain points in innovating that people should be aware of when they're going down this process?
I'll give kind of a general statement to that at first, which is, so for me, innovation, you can't have innovation without failure. And I think a pain point a lot of people experience is that you're going to experience some multiple points of failure along the way.
Sure.
And I think what's important to realize is there are probably other people who are going through that too, and probably for the same exact idea that you're kind of thinking about. And a lot of times innovation is about pushing through the hard points that other people did not. And that's kind of like that generation execution. This is the execution piece. And so if you can really push past these points that are hard, that's probably the most fruitful innovation you can get to, because other people didn't want to go that far. So I guess to your question of like, how do people deal with those hard points? I think what's helpful is to think about I'm going through this for a reason, and it's likely because this is probably going to be even more valuable. So it's kind of flipping the failure on its head, which is I'm probably going to get more out of this because it's even harder than I anticipated.
Yeah. So you kind of address it with that last answer, but how would you encourage people to really fail well then? And what does that look like?
I mean, it kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier, which is I think you need to give license to people to iterate and test, and that failure is like a point along the line. It's not the end point. I think a lot of people think about failure as the end point, where it's like, I'm presenting this and this is my final draft. It's like, no, people need to think about something as more fluid. And I think it's hard to give something that people poke holes in. I think we try to really encourage the environment on a day-to-day basis of, we're going to present things, we're going to present them in a way that iterates quickly on a day-to-day basis, and there are going to be holes poked in this, but it's okay because we're making something that's a lot better. I guess I guess what I think back to, I'll give you an example. Actually, back to the founding of DADO. So when we first launched the product, we had a very limited product. We could only do project drawings, specifications, submittals on our mobile application. And we started testing the application on a few job sites in Sacramento. And when we launched, there was not good reception of the product. We had issues with connectivity. We had issues with drawings just not showing up. There were a few things. It definitely felt like a failure. I think the interesting piece that comes out of it is, and this is something actually that, I'll give you an example of something we learned, something that has guided us to this day, is that there was an idea that Jake and I were iterating on with engineering, and we kind of put this into the application, and it turned out to be like one of the most utilized features. And this has to do with like the automation of document administration and relating of documents. So like we went to the job site the first week, no one was really using it. Then I kept on going back week after week, and we were making improvements to the product along the way. And then what we realized is the foreman on the site were like using specs and submittals the most in DADO. And that's because the spec is this huge 1,200 page document. Submittals are also usually in packages that are hundreds of pages. And they were using DADO because they were at the beginning of a project, and they had to lay it out and order the materials. So they were using DADO to basically cut through all the junk in the spec. And they were looking like for the pipe insulation. They would just go just to the pipe insulation in the spec, and then they'd have the related submittal to that pipe insulation, so they would know if it was approved, what product they needed to order. So I say this to say, when we talk about product development as a company, I think we like to tell these stories of times when we have failed from a leadership perspective, to encourage other people to realize that there aren't going to be like immediate successes. So I guess to answer your question in short, I would say there are two pieces. One is on a day-to-day basis, encouraging the fact that failure is a part of the process. And then also leading by example by saying, hey, this is a time when I failed, but I kept on pushing through, and then this and this and this happened, and this was the end result, which was positive. And that's like that hopeful piece.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I like the failure is not an endpoint. It's just an iterative journey. That it's really not about that failure outcome. It's about learning things and getting better along the way, because you can always get better. No matter if you have the world's greatest product or not, there's always something that you can get better at. And so figure out what that is and to keep learning from what you're doing. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I think failure leads to a lot of more focus. I think when we think about it from a product perspective, failure means like we're not serving this unmet need fully.
Yeah.
But then when you put something into a customer's hands, like in this example, you really know whether you're solving their need or not, and you know where you're not solving their need, and so that really helps you think about, okay, I need to do this to really solve that problem. And it's a little demoralizing, especially when you have like customers who are using it like, in construction, people typically don't really give things a second chance. So it's kind of high stakes at some point, but it makes your company better and the product better. And as long as you realize it's not an endpoint, it's just a step along the way. I feel like that is what you need to be motivated to continue on this innovation journey.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting point there in that I think some people take it personally when somebody says, I don't like that feature, or I don't think this is going to work. So how do you avoid the personal nature of that, of somebody's kind of shutting you down when that's probably not really the case? They, maybe they didn't say it as eloquently as what they could have, but
right.
How do you not take it personally when somebody says no to your product, or you failed and you have to try to learn something else?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I guess it's kind of like innovation in the sense that not everyone's going to be brought on board at once. Like, to create a culture where you are accepting of iteration is difficult, and you're probably going to have peaks and valleys, forever, because it's just always hard to deal with certain types of failures. So
kind of fights against human nature.
It does. I think similar to innovation, you have to be accepting of the fact that it's going to be a process, but along the way, if there are wins, I feel like really highlighting those wins. Hey, this is really positive. I think for us, when we were developing a recent feature, it didn't come out like there was kind of low usage in the beginning because of a number of gaps in the product. But I think what we've been trying to express with this feature is we just came out with another version of it, and now it's getting a lot of good reception from customers. Is that we brought out this first version, and it really enabled us to have really good conversations with customers, because you put something in their hand and that really made the product even better. So I think we try to highlight along the way, hey, this was actually a win. And that basically, you can't always have failure is a very negative word. I think it's kind of demoralizing. I think what you have to do along the way is translate, what did this get us by doing this? And so that's like expressing the positive aspect of this failure and what you're what you're doing going forward. I think always looking towards the future is really what failure is about. Although when you think about it, it's kind of, you think about it retrospectively. I think if you miss what's the future going to look like, that's how it can become a little bit negative, and people take it personally because, and when you're looking at something in retrospective, it's saying, oh, you did this, you did this, you did this. And I think when you think about what you're doing in the future, it takes blame off of people, and it's more about how we as a team going to achieve the goal. And instead of focusing on this is why this happened, it's more about what are we going to do now. Yeah,
I think that's spot on with the future focus. I really like that. I had set up that kind of dichotomy in my head about it before, but I like that a lot. And it kind of brings back in that storytelling element of it as well too, that you're really closing the loop by being future focused. It's not being, Pollyanna pie in the sky. It's you're grounding it in the direction that you're actually headed.
Right. Yeah. You try to.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that kind of direction, what do you think that the future of construction is going to look like over the next few years here?
Big question. Okay. I think to answer that question, I just want to level set on the context I think we are in as an industry, and then I'll answer that. But I think the context is really important because that's how I think about it.
Sure.
So, a few things for the context. One is, I think construction is becoming significantly more complex. So we're building larger, more complex, more technologically advanced buildings. Mm-hmm. These are like multifaceted projects. They probably have millions of components. There are like thousands of decisions that have to be made. And contractors basically are forced to keep up with and figure out how to keep up with the increasing demands from owners of these big buildings. And I think the reality is that trend's going to continue because there are other global trends. Right? We have climate change, and construction accounts for a large percent of global emissions, and contractors are going to be asked to build smarter buildings. Yesterday in California, there was regulation that is being proposed that is going to require all commercial and or high-rise residential buildings to have solar panels installed. So it's just this is going to be happening. It's going to be a trend, and the requirement is that you're going to have solar panels and battery storage on site. So there are just going to be changes. In addition to that global trend, we also just have increasing urbanization. So we're going to have cities that are going to be built up more. We're going to have more cities be built, and you're going to have the infrastructure built to support the increasing population of cities. So that's kind of the context. Because that's the world we live in, it's clear that construction is going to have to move towards a more streamlined process. And for me, what that means is act more like manufacturing. And so I think prefabrication has become more and more important. Now, I know a lot of people say that, prefabrication is the next trend, but I guess what I want to say is I think that there's a caveat to it that I would say, which is the prefabrication technology is kind of there. Like cutting the metal is there. That's there. Right. What I think is not there is technology to enable prefabrication to happen, and that's what I think is the next wave of construction. So let me give you an example. So the projects are more complex, right? So there's going to be more information being thrown at contractors, and they're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. So I think what's going to happen is there's going to be technology developed that enables the exchange of information to be frictionless between the stakeholders in construction. So you can't fabricate offsite unless you have the most up-to-date BIM model, the most up-to-date field conditions. And I think we're going to have software built that enables the frictionless exchange of information, but also like the discovery of new information, like recommendation engines. They'll say, hey, you're fabricating this piece, a change order just got submitted on the part of the building that you're fabricating this piece for, that you should check this out. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I mean, you already see today companies like Doxel, where they take in all this visual data, they connect to the BIM model, and they say, hey, we noticed something. We think it's going to impact the schedule because of these field conditions. Like you should watch out for this. And so I think for me, the next wave of construction is we're not only going to see the gathering and enabling of frictionless information, but the use of technology, predictive technology, to facilitate decision making.
Yeah, I think you're right on that for sure. In this middle of kind of waiting for that industry to really unfold and take place, and the technology to catch up to it, how do you avoid, or that you probably can't avoid it, at least minimize the information overload from all the data that's coming in from projects?
I'd first say there's no one solution, but I do think a key theme that would cut across all the solutions that could affect or minimize information overload is keeping things very simple.
Uh-huh.
I think, okay, I'll give you an analogy. When you write an email, you don't want to write an essay in an email unless it's like a CYA email for like in the future. And
if it's too long of email, I'm not reading it.
yeah. If it's too long of an email, you're not going to read it. First of all, you're not going to understand what it says, and you're definitely not going to remember what it says. So, and I think like writing a good email it's really important. It can be difficult for people because they don't want to focus on writing the email. I think the same can be said for construction. And I think a lot of the software out there today is good, but it really focuses on housing the information. It doesn't focus on accessing that information, kind of like that email, right? It's like, how is my reader going to read this thing? Like I put all the information in there, but you don't think about how are they going to actually access the important pieces that I want them to.
Yeah.
And so to avoid information overload, I think we'll have to think about how people access information and making that really, really easy for them. And basically, how do you access documents in a really, really easy way?
Yeah. I love that. Because, even from a communication perspective, there are certain pieces of information that are a better fit and translate better in different mediums. And so I think it's incumbent on somebody to know this piece of information needs to go over here on this channel. This piece of information is different. It needs to go over here on this channel. And this is how it's kind of best understood and everybody can grasp it and find it and know where it is. And I think having those clear lines and swim lanes, if you will, that's a big help.
And I think even what's kind of funny is, projects are more complex. And like, if you look at on a job site, a foreman's trying to install like a light fixture on the fourth floor, and there's probably, 40 of them. To figure out how to install that thing, they have to look at the submittal, they have to look at the equipment schedule, they have to look at like the reflected ceiling plan to figure out like how thick the concrete is and if they need anchors or not. There are so many documents you have to look up to answer that question that you have to make it really easy to just like run through these documents to gather all the information really quickly, because ultimately they need to just get to the work and figure out how to do it. And if they spend so much time trying to just find the information, it's like you're already exhausted once you found.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the schedules are already ridiculously tight. They don't have time to go and sift through all that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the schedules are tight. So now the person in the field actually has to figure out how they're going to install this thing. Because the documents today are just, oh yeah, here's where light fixture go. But then it's like, okay, how are we going to get the conduit there? Like, how are we going to do everything? So yeah, I think it adds to the problem, to your point.
Yeah. Well, if you could innovate one thing in the industry, what would it be?
It would be creating that technology for that would enable prefabrication. Like I think I would want to play in the space of prefabrication, but I think to really the technology, the innovation I want to work on is how do you enable prefabrication to happen? Like to have a streamlined process, it's not like it just happens. You need to have a really organized system that facilitates that prefabrication. So I'd want to work in the prefabrication space, both because I think it'll be hugely beneficial for construction, but also because I think it could have a huge impact on making buildings more sustainable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for those who aren't familiar, what is DADO and how do people get a hold of you and find out more information?
Good question. So DADO, you can think of us as your automated document management system. We also like to say we're the Google search for construction documents. So if you're trying to look up all these documents, you can go to DADO, type in or say a natural language search and find what you're looking for. And if you want to reach out, Greg at projectdado.com, you can feel free to go to our website, projectdado.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Awesome.
Well, Greg, last question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
All right. So innovation, what does it mean to me? We've kind of talked about this during the podcast today. I like to give the example of the Dyson vacuum. So they went through 5+ years of development and like 5,000 plus prototypes. And that's a lot of failure. That's a lot of failure along the way. Now it's really successful in 50+ countries. And so for me, innovation is the generation and execution of new ideas, but really what it is about the willingness to fail and pushing through that failure.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Greg. I appreciate it. Those great perspectives on innovation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.